Welcome to the One Minute Apologist.
1 Minute Apologist.
If you had 1 minute to be able to unpack for the audience, we interview the world's leading apologists to provide credible answers to curious questions. What sort of evidence is there that the Gospels contain eyewitness testimony?
Well, there's a number of things we can look at. Earlier in another segment, I mentioned how in Paul, 1 Corinthians 11, he preserves a tradition of Jesus' words at the Last Supper, for which we know we have multiple independent testimonies. So it seems that can reflect eyewitness testimony. You've got some other things that are really curious as we read in the Gospels. For example, in the Synoptic Gospels, there's the story about a woman who anoints Jesus with perfume, and the disciples get on her for doing this, says, hey, we could have sold this and given to the poor. And Jesus says, no, don't get on her for this. She's done a nice thing for me. She's prepared me for burial. And I tell you that whenever the gospel's preached going forward, this woman will be remembered. Well, what's interesting about that is here she's supposed to be remembered and her name isn't given. Why is she anonymous? Her name isn't given until John. Later on, the last gospel to be written. Well, some scholars might say, well, yeah, but that's because with time you had some more details added. Well, that could be true, but we don't find the Christians doing this until the 4th century, and John was only written a couple decades later. So it would seem that the best explanation would be that the reason she's anonymous in the Synoptic Gospels is because she was still alive at the time. She had provided the story, or some of the eyewitnesses had, and they were trying to protect her. When John's writing a few decades later, she's dead and her anonymity isn't necessary. The same thing can be said with Peter in the garden, who chops off the ear of the servant of the high priest. In the Synoptics, he's not mentioned, not named. It's just someone who was there did this. But later on in John, he mentions it's Peter. So same thing, the anonymity could have been there to protect Peter at that point, because we're talking about the servant of the high priest. But once Peter's dead, and we know he died in the mid-60s, and John's writing this perhaps in the 90s, the anonymity isn't even an issue anymore. This, again, there's multiple instances like this and would seem to weigh in favor of eyewitness testimony.